I still remember the moment as if it were yesterday. The moment my heart stopped and my world tilted in a way that nothing could have prepared me for. There we were at the bustling airport terminal, Lily, my 7-year-old adopted daughter, standing in front of me with her tiny backpack clutched in her small hands. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. She was full of excitement for her first trip overseas, completely oblivious that the people she thought of as grandparents were about to make a choice that would crush her in an instant. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted most turned against the person you love? That cold, creeping panic that paralyzes you for just a fraction of a second before your mind kicks into overdrive? That's exactly what I felt as my mother, Margaret, leaned down and whispered the words that made my blood run cold. "She isn't blood," she said. And then, with a final, chilling tone, "Leave her." My daughter's eyes widened. The words hit her like a sudden storm. She clutched her bag tighter, a tear rolling down her cheek. Her small voice trembled as she tried to ask Mommy. But the question caught in her throat, her confusion blending with fear. Around us, the terminal buzzed with movement, passengers dragging their rolling luggage, announcements echoing over the loudspeakers. But for Lily, the world had gone silent. And for me, every instinct screamed to act. I didn't move. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I just stayed quiet. Why? Because in that moment, I realized that anger, confrontation, or panic would only make it worse. If I reacted rashly, I risked escalating a scene that could traumatize my daughter further. If I stayed calm, I could observe, strategize, and protect her. Have you ever noticed how, in moments of extreme stress, silence can carry more power than words? That's exactly the balance I needed to strike. As my parents turned toward the gate, dragging their luggage behind them, Lily's small body trembled with the fear of abandonment. I felt her tiny hand twitch, almost reaching for them, almost pleading for recognition, for a hint that she mattered. And I realized something profound. She needed me more than ever, not just to comfort her, but to assert that she belonged, that she was valid, and that no one, not even her grandparents, could take that from her. The terminal around us seemed oblivious at first. People were talking, laughing, rushing toward their gates. But in moments like these, strangers can sense tension. Some passengers paused, watching with curiosity. Others pretended not to notice, unwilling to insert themselves into family drama. But one person noticed, someone who didn't belong to our family, someone whose authority could tip the scales, the airport manager. I didn't notice him at first. My attention was entirely on Lily, on her frightened face, on the smallness of her hands clutching a backpack that suddenly felt heavier than any luggage in the terminal. But then he approached, deliberate, professional, and calm. His presence immediately shifted the energy of the situation. He picked up our boarding passes, scanning them quietly. His gaze fell on my parents first, assessing their demeanor, and then landed on me and Lily. The air grew heavier, the tension thicker. Have you ever had that feeling when someone's presence alone changes everything? That authority, calm, and focus can diffuse chaos without a single word? That's what he brought to the moment. He didn't rush us. He didn't shout. He simply picked up the boarding passes and read the names. And then he looked at my parents. Slowly, deliberately, with a hint of disbelief. "You might want to read this," he said. The words hung in the air like a cliffhanger in a story that no one could yet resolve. My mother's face, previously cold and assured, tightened imperceptibly. My father's jaw clenched. They realized that something had just shifted, but they didn't know what. And my daughter, little Lily, just stood there, clutching her bag, tears silently rolling down her cheeks, not knowing whether she was about to be abandoned or saved. In that moment, time slowed. I could feel my heart beating in my throat, my mind racing through possibilities. Would my parents finally recognize the gravity of what they had done? Would the airport manager intervene? Would Lily be taken from me, even for a moment? And yet, through it all, I remained quiet, because I had to think, to calculate, to act, but only when the right moment presented itself. Because in a situation like this, where love, trust, and family collide with cruelty, one wrong move could cause lasting damage. And what came next, the words on that boarding pass, the confrontation that was about to unfold, and the reaction from my parents, would change everything. And no one in that terminal, least of all my daughter, saw it coming. Have you ever watched someone you love be rejected by the very people who are supposed to protect them? That's exactly how it felt as my mother's words hung in the airport air, slicing through the background noise like a blade. She isn't blood. Leave her. The sheer cruelty of it stunned me, and the way it landed on Lily's small shoulders was almost unbearable to witness. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, tears threatening to spill, and I could see the confusion written in every line of her face. She didn't understand why her grandparents, people she had trusted, could treat her this way. I wanted to shout, to confront my parents, to scream at them for their heartlessness. But I didn't. I stayed silent. You see, in moments like these, calm is not weakness. Calm is control. And I needed to control the situation long enough to protect Lily. I could feel her little hand trembling in mine, her fingers barely gripping the strap of her backpack. Have you ever seen a child's fear so pure, so raw, that it pierces right through you? That's what this was. And it was all because of the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. Passengers around us began to notice. Some glanced curiously, others pretended not to see, focused on their own boarding passes or phones. But the whispers started to ripple through the terminal. Is that child alone? What's going on? Why are the grandparents ignoring her? I didn't answer. I didn't explain. I simply held her close, keeping my presence calm, unwavering. Every parent knows this instinct. When your child is threatened, your mind races faster than your heart beats, but your face has to remain a mask of reassurance. My father, Robert, seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. His eyes darted nervously between Lily and my mother. I could see the hesitation in him. He didn't openly support leaving her behind, but he also didn't stop it. His silence made the moment heavier. It's strange how silence can feel like consent when someone's morality is passive. I could feel it pressing against my chest. I thought back to the conversations we had over the past 2 years, subtle digs and questions about Lily's place in the family. My mother had never hidden her disdain for adoption, framing it as tradition, lineage, blood. But I had learned that exposing a child to cruelty rarely solves anything. Confrontation in a public, emotional state could escalate into disaster. I had to calculate every move, every word, every reaction. Lily's trembling hand slipped slightly, and I instinctively tightened my grip. "It's okay, sweetie," I whispered, my voice low but steady. "Mommy's right here. No one can hurt you." Her eyes flicked to me, searching for reassurance, and I could feel her trust in me as tangibly as the straps of her backpack digging into her shoulders. I knew that she needed to feel safe before she could even begin to process the injustice she was witnessing. The tension escalated as my mother began moving toward the gate, dragging her carry-on with her. Each step she took felt like a countdown. Passengers began to notice more, some stopping to watch, others muttering under their breath. The terminal, once a blur of announcements and rolling suitcases, seemed to shrink around us, focused entirely on this small, terrifying confrontation. I could feel Lily's fear mirrored in my own pulse, and I realized that the stakes were higher than just words. They were about her sense of belonging, her understanding of love, and her trust in the people she calls family. And then, the first sign of intervention appeared. The airport manager, a tall, deliberate man with a professional demeanor, approached. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in Lily, me, and my parents. His authority radiated silently, instantly shifting the balance. He didn't speak at first. He simply observed, evaluating who had the moral high ground, who was in control, and who was about to make a mistake. I could see it in my parents' eyes. They realized, perhaps too late, that someone else had entered the equation, someone whose attention might change everything. The airport manager finally picked up the boarding passes. His eyes scanned quickly, deliberately, and then he paused. He looked at my parents slowly, a deliberate tension building in the silence. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. The whispers among passengers grew louder, but no one stepped forward. And then he spoke, his voice calm but deliberate, cutting through the static of the airport background. "You might want to read this." In that moment, I realized that everything was about to change. The words he had spoken, simple as they were, carried the weight of authority, fairness, and inevitable consequences. My mother's confident composure faltered. My father's hesitation turned to panic. And my daughter, little Lily, held my hand tightly, unaware of the power that was about to shift, but fully trusting that I would protect her. Because at that moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next few seconds would decide not only the safety of my daughter, but the entire narrative of how my parents' cruelty would be exposed. And it was about to unfold in a way that no one in that terminal could have predicted. Have you ever noticed how authority can change the entire dynamic of a situation, even before a single word is spoken? That's exactly what happened the moment the airport manager, Mr. Thompson, stepped into our little corner of the terminal. His presence alone commanded attention. People stopped, their curiosity piqued, sensing that something significant was unfolding. But for me, it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about giving Lily the space and protection she needed while ensuring that her grandparents could no longer manipulate the situation. Mr. Thompson approached slowly, his eyes sweeping the scene, Lily trembling in my hand, my mother's icy expression, my father's uncertain stance, and the murmuring passengers beginning to whisper to one another. He didn't ask a question immediately. Instead, he moved with deliberate calm, picking up the boarding passes in one hand and holding them lightly, as if they contained the answer to a puzzle only he could solve. I watched my mother, Margaret, shift uncomfortably. Her confidence, the kind that comes from assuming control over every family scenario, faltered slightly. She realized, perhaps too late, that the authority in this situation was no longer hers. Her eyes flicked between me and Mr. Thompson, scanning for some loophole, some way to assert dominance, but found nothing. This was a different kind of power, the kind that comes with rules, legality, and moral clarity, and it left her momentarily speechless. Mr. Thompson's gaze landed on my parents first, and I could see the subtle change in their demeanor. My father's jaw tightened. He tried to intervene with a word, but stopped. The silence in the terminal was growing louder than any shout. Passengers were now fully aware that something was off, and many leaned forward, straining to see the unfolding drama. And Lily, clutching my hand tightly, looked up at me for reassurance. Her small eyes searched mine, trusting that I knew what to do next, that I had a plan even when the world seemed intent on abandoning her. He scanned the boarding passes, his eyes stopping briefly on Lily's name. That pause lasted longer than I expected, and my heart pounded in my chest. Why did he linger there? Was it an error? Or did he already see what I saw, an injustice about to happen? Then he looked back at my parents, his expression calm but unmistakably serious. And that's when he spoke. "You might want to read this." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. My mother's face paled almost imperceptibly. My father's uncertainty turned into visible panic. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the terminal faded into the background, replaced by a tense silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. Passengers leaned closer, sensing that something monumental was unfolding before them. I could feel Lily's hand tighten around mine, her small fingers pressing into mine like a lifeline. She didn't understand the full gravity of what was happening, but she trusted me completely. And that trust was more powerful than any argument or confrontation I could have initiated. Sometimes, protecting a child isn't about raising your voice. It's about holding the line, staying calm, and letting the world catch up to the reality you know. The airport manager handed the boarding passes back to my parents, his gaze steady and unwavering. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lecture. He simply let the weight of the facts speak for themselves. And for the first time, my parents had to face an undeniable truth. Their attempt to abandon a child based solely on her adoption had been noticed, documented, and called into question by someone with the authority to intervene. I watched their faces shift through a range of emotions: shock, denial, anger, and finally, the reluctant recognition that they had overstepped. My mother's lips parted, perhaps to say something, but the words never came. My father's hands fidgeted with his wallet, as if he could erase the moment with a simple motion. But nothing could undo what had happened. The situation had shifted irrevocably. Lily, still clutching my hand, began to sense that the tension around us wasn't just about anger, it was about justice. Her tearful face slowly started to relax as she realized that I wasn't going to let anyone hurt her. She had been abandoned in theory, but not in practice. I was there, calm, steady, and in control. And that realization, though small, gave her strength. Passengers continued to watch, murmuring softly among themselves. Some discreetly pulled out their phones, sensing a story unfolding that was larger than any ordinary terminal drama. And I knew that the next few seconds were crucial. Any misstep from my parents, any rash movement, could have escalated the situation. But with Mr. Thompson's calm authority standing beside us, there was no room for further cruelty. The manager finally spoke again, his voice low but deliberate, aimed directly at my parents. These documents show the authorized guardian for this child. Everything else is irrelevant. She travels with her mother. You do not have the right to leave her here. The words cut through the air like a knife. My mother froze, her carefully constructed authority utterly dismantled by one simple fact. My father's face turned pale. And Lily, still holding my hand, let out a small sigh of relief, her trust in me reaffirmed. And yet, the climax wasn't fully over. The confrontation, the humiliation, and the exposure of my parents' bias were only beginning. The reactions of those around us, the whispers, the stares, the quiet judgment, would amplify the consequences of their actions in a way that no one could ignore. Because sometimes, public accountability is the most powerful tool of all. But what came next? The immediate reaction from my parents, the way the terminal responded, and the way I chose to act in that moment, would escalate everything even further, and no one in that airport could have predicted the shock that was about to follow. Have you ever seen someone's carefully constructed world collapse in an instant? That's what happened to my parents the moment the airport manager spoke. Margaret and Robert had always believed that authority, tradition, and their own sense of family hierarchy could override reason. They thought their words alone, "She isn't blood. Leave her," were enough to make the world bend to their will. But suddenly, the balance had shifted, and for the first time, their power was gone. Completely. I could see it in their eyes. My mother's expression, once cold and calculating, wavered. Her jaw tightened, her lips parted, searching for some argument that would regain control, but there was none. My father's posture, usually rigid, betrayed his uncertainty. He shifted from foot to foot, realizing that the quiet authority of Mr. Thompson and the documented legality of Lily's travel arrangements had trapped him in a situation he could not command. And all the while, passengers stopped, their whispers growing louder, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Lily clutched my hand so tightly it hurt, but I didn't move. I didn't have to. Sometimes, the most powerful protection isn't a shout or a confrontation, it's calm decisiveness. It's knowing that you are right, that the law and truth are on your side, and that your presence alone communicates safety. Lily could feel it. She tilted her small head up toward me, and in her wide, trusting eyes I saw relief. She realized that despite what had been said, she would not be abandoned. I was here. And that was all that mattered. The airport manager's gaze never wavered. He handed the boarding passes back to my parents, his calm authority speaking volumes. His voice carried just enough weight to make them understand that this was not negotiable. These boarding passes indicate the legal guardian for this child. She travels with her mother. You do not have the authority to leave her here. Each word landed with precision, and I watched my mother flinch, her composure cracking under the pressure of public accountability. Passengers began to murmur audibly, some leaning in, others discreetly taking out their phones to record the unfolding situation. You could feel the air in the terminal shift, curiosity, judgment, and empathy mingled together. Margaret, who had relied for years on the perception of control, was now exposed, her bias and cruelty laid bare for anyone paying attention. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to defend herself, but the words died before they reached the air. Even Robert, who often hid behind her authority, couldn't find a foothold in the moment. Lily, still clutching my hand, began to relax. She didn't fully understand the conflict, but she understood one thing: I had not abandoned her. I had stayed quiet, observed, and acted strategically, ensuring her safety without escalating the drama unnecessarily. Have you ever realized how much a child's sense of security depends not on force, but on your presence? In that moment, I felt the depth of that truth. Her little hand in mine was all the validation I needed. Then came the subtle but irreversible shift. People began to notice the power dynamic, the child being protected, the parents being exposed. A few passengers nodded at me discreetly, others whispered under their breath, and some stared openly at my mother and father, realizing the cruelty that had been attempted in public. The terminal, once a blur of travelers and announcements, had turned into a stage where justice, calm strategy, and morality were on full display. My mother's face turned red, a mix of embarrassment and outrage. She opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to threaten, but the manager's calm presence prevented her from speaking. The power she had relied on for decades, intimidation, manipulation, familial expectation, had evaporated. She had no allies here except my father, who himself was too hesitant to intervene. And yet, even in this public confrontation, the moment hadn't fully climaxed. The exposure of bias, the recognition of authority, and the validation of my daughter were all building towards something more profound. Because what happens when someone's cruelty is laid bare in front of dozens of witnesses? What happens when a child's safety is prioritized over tradition, hierarchy, or entitlement? The consequences extend beyond the immediate situation. They ripple through family, social perception, and personal conscience. I leaned down slightly, keeping my voice calm but firm, and whispered to Lily, "It's okay. See? Everything's fine. You're safe." Her little nod, a mixture of relief and trust, reaffirmed everything I had done to that point. And then I looked at my parents. Their faces, once masks of control and authority, were now the mirrors of their actions, disbelief, shame, and anger intermingled in ways that words could not capture. Passengers, airport staff, and even nearby travelers were now fully aware of the situation. Whispers turned into murmurs of judgment, eyes shifted toward the manager and me, and the reality of public accountability hit my parents like a tidal wave. In that moment, I realized that the humiliation, the exposure, and the confrontation were as much a lesson as they were a shield. Lily had learned that her mother would protect her. My parents had learned that cruelty has consequences. And the world had watched it unfold. But the climax wasn't quite over. One final twist was about to occur, a moment that would fully confirm Lily's safety, cement my authority as her mother, and leave my parents stunned in a way they would never forget. And it all began with the next words the airport manager spoke, the next glance, the next action that would turn a tense confrontation into undeniable resolution. The terminal felt strangely quiet after the manager's words. My parents stood frozen, their faces a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and humiliation. Margaret's lips trembled as if she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Robert's usual indecisiveness had evaporated entirely. He simply shifted from foot to foot, realizing that the authority of the airport and the clarity of the law had stripped him of any influence. And in that stillness, Lily clutched my hand, tiny fingers wrapped tightly around mine, her eyes wide with relief and a glimmer of understanding. Have you ever felt that deep, instinctual satisfaction of protecting someone who trusts you completely? That sense that all your restraint, all your patience, and all your careful observation had culminated in a victory far more meaningful than anyone witnessing could comprehend? That was me in that moment. The passengers might see drama, confrontation, and tension, but for me, it was about something infinitely more important: my daughter's safety and her trust in me. I knelt slightly to Lily's level and whispered softly, "See? Everything's okay. You're safe now. Nothing is going to happen to you while I'm here." Her small nod, her relieved exhale, and the way her eyes softened as she looked at me reminded me that parenting isn't just about teaching lessons, it's about embodying them. In the middle of chaos, your presence, your calmness, and your decisive actions are the greatest lessons a child can receive. Margaret's face had shifted completely now. Gone was the cold, commanding air she always carried. It had been replaced by a realization: her cruelty, her prejudice, her attempt to abandon Lily had not only failed, but had been witnessed, documented, and corrected by someone outside her control. The humiliation was tangible. Even Robert, who had often hidden behind her authority, couldn't shield her from the consequences of her actions. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and my parents had no choice but to recognize it. Passengers whispered among themselves, some nodding subtly in my direction, others craning their necks to witness the final act of accountability. The manager, Mr. Thompson, remained composed, his calm authority acting as a silent reinforcement of the rules and justice at play. Lily had her mother, her trust reaffirmed, and my parents were left to face the public consequences of their actions. It was a subtle but undeniable victory: protection and love over cruelty and prejudice. I thought about the years of subtle exclusion, the comments, the veiled criticisms, and the implicit bias my parents had always expressed toward Lily. For a long time, I had internalized the stress, wondering how to protect her while maintaining civility. But in that airport, all that preparation, all that restraint, and all that strategy came to fruition. One moment of calm, strategic action had prevented a trauma that could have left deep scars. And it had done more than that: it had exposed the truth in a way that words alone could not. I held Lily close as the terminal slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Announcements resumed, travelers walked past, and the hum of luggage wheels rolled along the polished floors. But the weight of what had happened lingered. The moment had changed everything, not just for my daughter and me, but for my parents, for the witnesses, and even for me. I realized that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is quiet, calculated, and resolute, like the calm in a storm. I looked back at my parents one last time. Margaret's shoulders were slumped, her carefully constructed authority shattered, replaced by a pale realization of her misjudgment. Robert avoided my gaze entirely, knowing that the moral high ground had shifted irreversibly. And in that moment, I understood a crucial truth: family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by protection, loyalty, and the choices you make when someone relies on you most. Lily had been abandoned in theory, but in practice, she had been held safe, cherished, and defended. That was what mattered. And as I watched her small face soften into a smile, finally feeling the relief that comes with knowing you are truly safe, I realized the lesson extended beyond our family. Life will test you. People will challenge your love, question your choices, and attempt to manipulate circumstances to their favor. But when you stay calm, observe carefully, and act decisively to protect those who depend on you, you can turn chaos into triumph. To the viewers watching this story, ask yourself: how far would you go to protect someone who trusts you completely? How much restraint would you exercise in the face of cruelty, and how would you balance strategy with love? Because sometimes, the most powerful actions are not the loudest, not the most confrontational, but the ones rooted in clarity, courage, and unwavering care. As we walked through the terminal, Lily skipping slightly beside me, I knew that the bond we shared had deepened beyond measure. The experience would shape her understanding of trust, safety, and love forever. And it would shape my understanding of motherhood in the most profound way. I had stayed quiet. I had observed. I had acted at the perfect moment. And in doing so, I had ensured that my daughter would never question who stood for her, who would protect her, and who would never let her face the world alone. Because in the end, blood doesn't define family. Presence, protection, and love do. And sometimes a quiet, strategic action in the midst of public chaos is enough to change everything forever.